Hello viewers, welcome back to the channel. So today let's look at this important topic, how to write biology essay questions. Okay, so we'll just do a revision, a quick revision. So with me here is this question from the essay questions, among the essay questions of biology. Okay, but before we actually look at the question, these are some of the important things that you need to know and understand when it comes to biology. So firstly, you need to understand the language. Okay, and what do I mean by the language? You need to know that each subject has its own language. So for biology, you need to know the language of biology. So for example, when they say state, when they use this term in the question, what does it mean? When they tell you to explain, what does it mean? When they tell you to describe, what does it mean? So you need to understand that when they tell you to state, you don't need to explain, you just need to list the points. Okay, if they tell you to state, maybe they ask you to state something, just list out the points without even explaining. That's what this question requires. It doesn't need explanations. Okay, but when they tell you to explain, now you start explaining the process. You explain what happens. But even on the explanation part, when they tell you, for example, to explain diffusion, you just define. This is almost same as define. Okay, you just explain what happens. For example, if they tell you to explain or define diffusion, you just give them the definition. Okay, it is the movement of particles from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, just like that. So under this one, you need to be what? You need to be precise, and you need to be accurate and direct to the point. You just explain in a simple way. Okay, that is explanation. When they tell you to describe, now you give details. Okay, you give out details. For description, for example, they will tell you to describe transpiration. You just don't go and give the definition, but you break down the entire process. What happens during what? During transpiration. Okay, so for descriptive questions, when they tell you to describe, you give out full details and step by step. Okay, you say details, then step by step you explain in details. That is descriptive type of questions. All right, so when it comes to essay part, what do you need to understand? Here's how we write essays in biology. So when it comes to essay part, these things are very important, so pay attention. For the essay part, the first thing that you need to put in mind is, whenever you've been given a question from the essay questions, the first thing is you need to understand. Okay, understand the question. This is very important, because you cannot really answer what you've not understood. So understand the question. If they tell you to explain the role of the kidney in excretion and for example, just excretion, you need to understand the question exactly. What does it mean? Meaning, you need to understand, what is the kidney in the first place? What is excretion? How does the kidney function when it comes to excretion? So understand the question minus understanding what the question requires, you will not be able to answer. So this is the first step when you are dealing with what? Essay questions. Understand the question clearly. The second thing that you need now to know is, this is very important when you are dealing with biology. When you are dealing with biology, like I said in the first place, each subject has its own language. For biology, you use the what? The language of biology, which are biological terms. So you use what? Use biological terms. Okay, for example, under this one, if you want to say if there is a part where you want to explain energy, or where you want to list out energy, or you want to mention energy in your explanation, you need to understand that since it's biology, you will not say energy. Instead, you use the terms like ATP. Okay, so this is the biological term, and the marker will know that, oh, this person knows what he's talking about. Okay, so instead of using energy, you use terms like what? ATP. Instead of using the movement of water from this region to this region, you use terms like what? Osmosis. Instead of you stating the movement of particles, you use terms like what? Diffusion. Okay, and instead of you using terms like the movement of ions from one place to another, you use terms like active transport. So all these are what? Are biological terms. So you need to understand that whenever you are dealing with essay questions, you should be using terms like this, the biological terms. Okay, for example, if you are dealing with digestion, you will say, or if you are dealing with respiration, instead of saying energy will be produced, you will say there will be the production of what? ATP. Okay, instead of saying water will move from region A to region B, you say osmosis will do what? Will occur. Then you continue with explanation. So these terms are very important. The third thing that you need to know and understand is, whenever you are dealing with essay questions, you need to write them in paragraphs. This is quite very important. Paragraphs. Okay? So we don't write essays in point forms. Okay? When it comes to essays, you need to write them in what? In paragraphs. So mind you, at first I told you on the language, that was generally the language of biology. Okay? Where I listed, like when they tell you to state, you just give them the points, you list the points. That is generally in biology. Okay? And that does not deal with the essay part, it deals with section A. But when you are dealing with the essay, there is no way you write out points. In essay part, you always use what? Paragraphs. And each paragraph may contain maybe 3 to 4 or even 5 what? Statements or lines. Okay? So you use paragraphs. Then the other important thing that you need to know is, consider the what? The number of marks. Number of marks. So this is very important because the number of marks determines how much information you're going to give out. For example, our question here contains what? 4 marks. This will determine how we will do it, how many points we'll give, and how we are going to answer the question. Okay, so for a question that contains maybe 4 marks, if it needs you to raise points alone, it means you need to raise 4 points. Okay, but sometimes there are cases where maybe you might give out 2 points. For a question that contains 4 marks, you give out 2 points, you will include biological terms, and you will include proper definitions, such that when you consider everything, it will lead you to what? To 4 marks. But the number of marks, you need to consider them. Okay, there is no way you can give 2 points on a question that contains 6 marks. That is just not enough. Okay, so you need to give out as many points as you can, depending on the number of marks. All right, so now let's look at the question, having understood that. So this is generally how we go about the biology essay questions. Understand the question, use these terms, then write them in paragraphs. Then you should consider the what? The number of marks. Now, our question here says, explain what would happen to a plant cell when it is placed in an hypotonic solution, and they've given it 4 marks. So you first understand the question, like I explained the process, the process on how to answer. So let's understand the question, what it is talking about. So they want us to explain what would happen to a what? A plant cell. Okay? Then the first thing is we need to explain when it is placed in an what? Hypotonic solution. So since they've said explain, we need to go we are not just going to give out points. We need to provide the definitions. We need to explain something. Okay, we need to define. Then we need to be direct and precise. Then the other thing, since we are explaining, what are we dealing with? We are dealing with a plant cell. This plant cell, they want to do what? To explain what would happen when it is placed in an hypotonic solution. So we have a plant cell which is being placed in a what? In an hypotonic solution. What is going to happen? Okay? So what do you say in this case? Meaning, for you to do this, the first thing you need to understand what is an hypotonic solution. Minus understanding this, you cannot answer the question. Okay? Because you will not know what will happen. So firstly, you need to define what is an hypotonic solution, because that's where we are placing the cell. So you would say an hypotonic solution is a solution. So you give out the definition. Is a solution whose water concentration is higher than the concentration of the cell. Concentration inside the cell. Concentration inside the cell. So we've given the definition of an hypotonic solution. It is a solution whose water concentration is higher than the concentration inside the cell. Meaning the solution has more water than the water which is what? Which is inside the cell. Then, since we've placed it in an hypertonic solution which has more water, we understand that osmosis is going to happen. So what will happen? What will happen to the cell is the cell, or the plant cell, will then gain or absorb what? Water by osmosis. Okay, so you explain, and in this case we've listed out the biological term. So the examiner will know that, oh, this person knows what he's talking about. He has explained the hypotonic solution, and he has used the biological term. The cell will gain or absorb water by the process of what? Osmosis. Okay, when it absorbs the water, and this is simple because we understand that this hypotonic has more water than the cell. So osmosis will move from where it is high, water will move from where it is high to where it is low. In this case, water is more concentrated in the hypotonic solution, so it will move from the solution to the what? To the cell. Hence the cell will gain water by the process of what? By the process of osmosis. What do you say now? So now you understand that after the plant cell has gained water by osmosis, you will say the cell will swell now. It will increase in size. It will expand, because after the cell gains water, the pressure will increase. So you will say this will increase the pressure inside the cell, and the cell will do what? Will swell. Okay, so you've again explained that the cell will swell, it will expand and increase in size. Why? Because of the increase in pressure, which is the Tagger pressure. Okay, so after the cell has increased in size, then you tell them what we call this condition. This is known as turgidity. This is known as what? As turgidity. So this is another biological term. Okay, this is known as turgidity. So that's the condition. Okay, then after you explain that, you give them the last point to say, because it has increased in size. If it was an animal cell, because mind you, we are dealing with a plant cell. If it was an animal cell which doesn't have the cell wall, after gaining water, it will burst. Okay, it will burst. But for a plant cell, you would say the plant cell does not what? Does not burst. So you say the plant cell however does not what? Does not burst. It will just increase in size without bursting. Why? You say because of the cell wall, because it has a cell wall which is very strong. So despite the pressure increasing and it expanding, it will not burst. Okay, because of the what? Of the cell wall. But the normal cell, the normal plant cell, has a regular shape. Okay, something like this, and it has the vacuole, the nucleus, and all the stuff. But when the cell is in this condition, it has been placed in an hypotonic solution, it will expand. Okay, it will expand, and we will still have the vacuole, the nucleus, and the cytoplasm and everything. So this is the difference. It is in a good shape before it is placed in this solution, but after being exposed or after being placed in an hypotonic solution, it expands but without bursting. So this is the what? This is the difference. Sometimes they might bring the diagrams like this, then they tell you which solution was it placed in. Another important aspect that you need to know. So these are the points. For these, for sure you can get what? The 4 marks, because you've given out the definitions, the biological terms, you've explained the processes, and you've listed out what is going to happen, the steps. So if they will ask you to explain when it is placed in an not in an hypotonic solution, if they asked you to explain what will happen if it was placed in an isotonic solution, or if it was placed in an hypertonic solution, because we have isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic. So you need to understand the question. If it's isotonic, the solution is what? The concentration is same. The amount of water in the cell and in the solution is same, meaning there will be no difference. Okay, but for a hypertonic, which is exactly opposite to this, will result in the cell shrinking, because the cell will have then more water than the solution, and hence the cell will be giving out water to the solution since the solution has less water. Okay, so everything will happen except it will be what? It will be in a reverse sense. So you get that. You need to understand, not just memorize. You need to know how everything will be happening. Okay, so that's it, and this is how you go about biology essay questions. I hope you have gotten the concept, and don't forget to subscribe and also like and share the video.